Welcome, neighbors and friends of the wonderful community at Louviers. This is a virtual town hall meeting with the candidates for County Commissioner in Douglas County, Colorado. My name is Gretchen Farrell, and I am a resident of the village of Louviers, located in Douglas County. I will be the moderator of tonight's event, along with my co-host Megan St. Clair, who will be monitoring the live stream on Facebook. Please leave questions and comments for the candidates as you watch the live stream. Tonight's event will be recorded and distributed to interested parties at the close of our conversation. It was our great hope that we would facilitate a bipartisan conversation with all of the candidates for commissioner in order to become more informed voters about issues related to our community, specifically also related to Highway 85 corridor, and which affects every resident of Douglas County. Tonight we are joined with Lisa Neal Graves, District 2 candidate for County Commissioner. Her opponent did not respond to our invitation for the virtual town hall. Also joining us is Darian Wilson, District 3 candidate for County Commissioner. Her opponent is incumbent Laura Thomas, who declined our invitation because, quote, according to the Douglas County staff, it is very likely that the Brannan Sand and Gravel will be filing a new land use application very soon. For this reason, Commissioner Thomas will not be able to participate in your town hall this evening, unquote. Welcome, candidates. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are excited to give you space to express your positions about issues of concern to friends and neighbors of Louviers and surrounding Douglas County. It is important to note that all residents of Douglas County will have the opportunity to vote for both of the open county commissioner seats. We have compiled a list of questions submitted by the public. The candidates did not have access to the questions prior to tonight's conversation. Each of the candidates was given the following ground rules. Each candidate will be given equal time to respond to the question. Candidates will not be offered time for rebuttal, so your position should be clear. Candidates will not launch personal attacks and be respectful of the time they are given to address voters directly. Introduction. To start, we will give each of you 5 minutes to tell viewers about yourself and your campaign and tell us why you are running for County Commissioner. Before we begin, how would you like to be addressed? Would you like to be addressed as Candidate Wilson or Darian Wilson, as Candidate Neal Graves, or Lisa?
Lisa.
Lisa.
Just Darian's fine.
Okay, great. Well, let's begin with Lisa. Lisa, you may have 5 minutes and you may begin now.
Awesome. Thank you so very much for actually hosting this event. I am grateful for the opportunity to meet with both you and the other residents of Louviers. I always say that wrong, but I'm learning. My name is Lisa Neal Graves, and I am running for Douglas County Commissioner for District 2. I am in the race primarily because I believe that our county can be better than we found it, and that we owe it to our young people to do just that. I have as a platform innovation, community, sustainability, and the future. From an innovation perspective, I bring to the table 25 plus years as a tech exec and lawyer, and community activist, right? Community organizer and volunteer. I believe that there are difficult and complex problems that we have in the county, but I also believe that there are innovative solutions that we can bring to them. I believe that we have an interesting and unique community of residents and neighbors, and I believe that we need to build a stronger sense of that community because, again, we owe it to each other to be neighbors and to look out for one another, and I believe that we have the ability to do just that, which is literally how I found you guys in the first place, is that it was through that community outreach. And then sustainability. I believe that we have to have a sustainable balance between how we develop and our wildlife as well as our open space, which brings us to a lot of the issues and concerns that you have in this particular topic as well. And then finally, from a future perspective, I believe that our young people And the developing brain that they have and all that they come with is an important part of who we will be in the future, and should have a seat at the table to determine how that future manifests. And I would love to be able to ensure that we leave this place better than we found it, so that they have a start that gives them a launching pad into the future that we know this county can become, even better than what we found it. And this is a beautiful place. We all move here because of the wildlife and the open space. And for many of us, it is also the homes are they're just beautiful, right? And so it's a great opportunity. I believe that the competencies that I bring and why I am running, it really is genuinely tied to how can we help and how do we build a better future for the county.
Hi,
Thank
I'm
you so
Darian
much.
Wilson. You want me to
Darian, yep, I'm going
start?
to
Okay.
go now. Thank you, Darian.
So thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed all the folks from town that I've met. I went out there today. Lisa and I went out to check out the property. I'm Darian Wilson. I'm running for Douglas County Commissioner. I'm a small business owner, a mother of 3, and an active community leader here in Highlands Ranch, where I've lived for over a decade. I started my first business when my oldest was 18 months old. She liked to be held all the time, and they didn't have beautiful baby carriers back in 1999, 2000 when I was having her. And so I started sewing them for myself, and people wanted them. So next thing I knew, I had a business on my hands. So kind of have a street MBA. I've always collaborated with other business owners to figure out how to do things. I'm a people connector. I connect people with each other to work things out. So grew that business into an internationally renowned brand, and sold it in 2009 to move to Colorado and fund the founding of our software consultancy. So my husband and I own a software consultancy, so that's my background. I got involved in local politics when my kids were hurt by what happened with our school board here locally. And I started getting involved in local elections then. In 2018, the Parkland shooting happened on my oldest child's 18th birthday. And it really brought down our evening. And she said, this just keeps happening and you adults just aren't doing anything about it. And I said, I will not stop until I can say I've done something about this. And so that year I worked really hard to help get Jason Crow elected. And people told me during that time that I should run for office. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. In 2019, the STEM shooting happened less than a mile from my 8-year-old school. And as I sat there in my car for 40 minutes listening to helicopters and siren after siren, I just decided I'd had enough and someone needed to challenge my opponent. So I'm running because we need a leader who listens, because I had been to several meetings at the Board of County Commissioners where I felt like I wasn't heard. I felt like the rest of the community wasn't heard. And my top issues are health, which started off as gun violence and mental health, but now that we're in a pandemic has evolved to that, and jobs, which is also a result of the pandemic and the resulting recession. As a small business owner, I really want to help other small business owners get out of this recession. And then lastly, conservation, because everybody I've talked to across the political spectrum loves Douglas County because of our wildlife. And these are all interconnected. And so your health in Louviers is going to be impacted by this asphalt plant if it goes in. And that is tied to conservation of the environment as well as your health. So these things are not distinct from each other. They all work together to keep us healthy. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions, because as I said, I'm a leader who listens, and I want to hear all sides on this and consider all the issues before making any decisions. But the main thing I'm here to do is to listen to you and find out more about what we can do about this. Oh, I can't hear you.
Thank you so much, candidates. I apologize. Megan is going to go ahead up and start with our first topic over here so that you will be able to read them as well. As mentioned earlier, Laura Thomas declined to participate tonight because her campaign anticipates that Brannon Sand and Gravel will soon submit a second land use application for an asphalt plant located in an area designated as light industrial zone adjacent to Louviers. Many of the current fears and frustrations in Louviers stem from the initial land use application that was officially withdrawn in the last week or so. we are wary of another battle with Brannan over the land use in the Louviers Valley. Our first topic is the Highway 85 corridor. A resident is very interested in hearing from each commissioner candidate on her position when it comes to long-range plans for the Santa Fe corridor. And we have the questions over here on the left. What do you envision development to look like along the Highway 85 corridor? What are your long-range plans for Santa Fe? Does growth in Douglas County support the need for multiple asphalt plants along Santa Fe long-term? You will each be given 5 minutes to respond. Darian, I will ask you to respond first, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to look at the map. I haven't had a lot of time to get my arms around this, but when we met with the folks at Brannan today, they said that this area is zoned general industrial. So I'm trying to look at the map right now on the county's website and figure that out. But my vision for development along the Highway 85 corridor is more office parks, places for people in office parks to eat lunch, and shops to support those businesses. That's kind of the vision I had for that, is that would be where some of these businesses that I'd like to attract to the county would live. So those are my long range plans and what I envision happening there, because I think we need more businesses in the county, because right now we have a traffic problem in that about 2/3 of residents are driving out of the county for work, and even more people are coming into the county to work at our restaurants and stores. And so that's creating a traffic problem, and we could cut down on that by having more businesses in the county. So I would like to see more businesses in the county, and I think along the corridor is a good place for that. And so does it support the need for multiple asphalt plants? That's a question I can't really answer because I haven't looked into that aspect that much, but I do know that it does not seem to be in alignment with what else is going on in the area. There are houses across Santa Fe from it. There are going to be apparently another 500 houses very near there. There's Louviers, there's Sterling Ranch that's going to grow pretty close to there. So it's pretty residential around there. And this is pretty heavy industrial. So to me, it's not in alignment with what else is going on in the area. But I also think that the company has a point that there is a need somewhere in the region for something like this. The question is, where would be a better place? And I think we need to give them a good answer before we just say no. We need to see, what can we work out? How can we meet in the middle in some way? Where could it go if not there? And then what can that land be used for if not that? I think we need to answer those questions. And I've only known about this for a few days, and I haven't had a chance to talk to everyone about it and read up on it fully, but those are my thoughts initially.
Great. Lisa, you may respond now.
Sorry about that. To the question of what do I envision the development to look like along Highway 85 corridor. One of the things that I really appreciated and loved about Douglas County when we were looking to move was that there is a character to the county. And so when I think about what development should look like along Highway 85, I would like for it to look more like the character of the other businesses that are along that county, along that corridor. And what you'll see along the corridors, there are restaurants, and then there are these sort of interesting little companies that really are more like the character and culture of what we expect when we see a Douglas County. And so from a long-range planning for Santa Fe, it would be incredibly cool to actually have sort of small businesses, like to Darian's point, an office park that isn't sort of your standard big business office park, but an office park that has the character of the county. In keeping with the character of the county, it has small businesses that are bringing in folks from neighboring counties who are looking for these specialty items, right? So to, sort of take advantage of the artsy and some of the interesting options that the county could bring. I'm a shoe designer. It would be incredibly cool to have a stop along the way where you could actually go in and get custom shoes. Those are all sort of in keeping with the character of the county. It would be similar, if not very, I guess you could say very similar to what you see in a Castle Rock, right? In terms of some of those areas where they've got these specialty businesses and opportunities. A lot of those companies have suffered during the pandemic, and this is an opportunity to really build out an entrepreneurial infrastructure to support a rebuild, to bring them back and to bring them back better. Does growth in Douglas County support the need for multiple asphalt plants along the Santa Fe in terms of a long term? Well, when Darian and I were there today, we learned that there is an asphalt plant in Castle Rock. And we also learned that there is one that's sort of between where they're proposing to build and Castle Rock. And so the question that we asked, I was really curious and wanting to understand, well, why wouldn't they find space along those lines or near those areas to put up the same? Because obviously those are areas that had been previously zoned for it, and they have addressed some of the concerns that we would address or we would have if they actually built here. To Darian's point, I don't disagree that we need to figure out what is absolutely needed, but I also fundamentally believe, and I've said this as part of sustainability, we have a water problem in Douglas County. And we can't continue the growth at the rate that we're going without taking a look at what our long-term strategy is for water. And we haven't really had anybody talking specifically about what our long-term water strategy is. And for many of the folks that are right in that area, they are using well water. And what we learned today is that the current plant is also using well water. And so, I look at that and I ask the question, one of the things that we learned was that they're bringing in a lot of the asphalt from Commerce City. We learned that there were other plants that were nearby. It was like, well, why aren't we bringing it in from those plants? And there really wasn't an answer. So I'd really love to understand better, for those plants that already exist, why aren't we using them more effectively? Isn't there an opportunity there from a business perspective to really look at how do we leverage what's already in place to support what we need going forward? And that would assume that our long-term strategy isn't overbuilding, but it is really building in concert with what is really available in the county, which means really building based on what are the water opportunities that we have here that would support development. And we haven't really seen or heard enough information or details about that. So I'm always that person that's looking for, let's not just make a conscious decision of we're going to do this because it's an emotional decision. I want to make sure that we understand what are the facts. What's the data? We did ask about trends because there is data available from what's happening in Commerce City. There's likely a lot of data that's available from Castle Rock as well. I'd love to understand how that plays with what's expected and what was planned for that particular little corridor in the development of an asphalt
Thank you,
plant.
Lisa. We also are, we had some people who were also concerned about our water, and so that's coming up. We're going to move on to our next topic, industrial zoning. Brandon Sand and Gravel is an existing business operator adjacent to the residential section of Louviers. Brandon also operates in Commerce City. Louviers received its light industrial designation in the 1980s. A lot has changed since then. As of now, only property owners and the commissioners are able to redesignate the zoning. Our questions are as follows. What are your thoughts on the current zoning designation near Louviers? In terms of zoning, will you work to prevent Louviers from becoming a heavy industrial area like Commerce City? Is there room in the county for rezoning given current and future developments countywide? And you will each be given 5 minutes. And Lisa, you may start this time.
So my thoughts on the current zoning designations near Louviers, I literally just learned about this a couple of months ago, and hadn't really looked into the zoning. We did have an opportunity to tour the area today, and I think that that was incredibly useful, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. It's such a quaint town. It's hard to imagine a lot of heavy industrial zoning around that town, primarily because of the nature, again, of the character and culture of the little town. And it's one of the few historic areas in that area. And I would just love to, again, ensure that we, in keeping with the current culture and how it currently looks. When people purchase their homes, and I'm talking about those folks who are more recent purchasers of homes, right? There are people who purchase their homes like way back in the 1800s, those and their families have retained them. But for people who are new purchasers of homes in that area, maybe they purchased them in the last 3 to 5 years, they didn't purchase them with an expectation that they were going to have heavy industrial areas in their residential, near their residential area, like Commerce City. I would love to would love to prevent that from happening, primarily because that will not just impact Louviers, it will impact Douglas County as a whole. And we owe it to the county to actually make sure that we're doing the right thing for the health and safety and welfare of our residents. Is there room for county, for rezoning given the current future development? I think that all of that depends on what we're talking about in terms of that future development. Are we talking about, sort of the small businesses that are focused on more light industrial efforts like shoemaking, like jewelry making, like those kinds of things? Or are we talking about asphalt plants? If we're talking about asphalt plants, it would be difficult at best to see that as a great thing for our county.
Thank you. Darian, would you like to answer?
Sure. I don't have a lot to add to what Lisa said, but I put in the chat a screenshot and a link to where I got the screenshot from the county's website. It is zoned general industrial. And looking at there's a larger section, probably the old DuPont area, that is zoned general industrial. And the thing that concerns me as I look at it is Plum Creek goes right through it. And as a resident of Highlands Ranch, and as I would be the representative for District 3, that is Highlands Ranch and the area directly south of it, that's really concerning. Plum Creek is part of our water supply. So, that impacts everybody downstream from there. And so what goes into Plum Creek doesn't stay in Plum Creek. It goes elsewhere. And it's not just a local concern, it's a concern for everyone in the area. So I'm not sure when this zoning happened. Like Lisa said, we just learned about this. I thought it was light industrial until we spoke to the person from Brandon today, and he said, oh no, it's general. And there isn't another place in Douglas County that's this big that's general industrial. And, I'm zooming out on this map and I'm not seeing it either. So I don't know where else you could go. And his argument was, well, we really need, geographically, we need an asphalt plant in this part of the metro area. And I get that, but having been there, it seems to me like I know Louviers is a historic district, that's an issue. There's the wildlife corridor issue. There are a lot of residential areas. It really is close also to the other side of Sterling Ranch where it's going to grow. So it doesn't seem like, to me, the right spot for heavy industrial. But the question is, what is? I understand the need for something in the South Metro area, not bringing asphalt all the way from Commerce City. I get that need. And so, again, we would need to figure out what would work for both parties, what would work for them to use their property, how would they use their property that would not harm the residents in the area. I'm looking at the zoning in Castle Rock. There's a small area of general industrial. I don't know if it's even as big as the plot in near Louviers. So, you know, if you click the link and zoom in and zoom out, the area near Louviers is really the biggest area of general industrial in the county. So that would have to be, definitely that would have to be looked at, and we'd have to talk to them about, well, what can you do with your space if we were to rezone it? What can you do there? What can, you know, what can we find for you to mitigate things? What are some ways you can mitigate things and minimize the impact on the residents? Today, you know, he was saying, look, it's not very dusty. And we said, well, why not? And he said, water. And Lisa said, where's the water from? He said, the well. We were like, oh no, that's not good. So there are layers of problem here for us to unfurl, and a couple days during the last days of our campaign are not my best time to resolve this big, complicated problem, but I am interested in addressing it, absolutely. So.
Thank you. So let's switch gears. Louviers is on the National Registry of Historic Places. In fact, it is the only existing historic designation for a historic district in the county. We think that it's something very special, and we would like it to be preserved. What steps are you willing to take to prevent industrial zoning from changing the character of our historic community? How would you ensure that the needs of local residents balance with the needs of business owners? How will you manage the interests of all of your voters, not just the residents of Highlands Ranch, Castle Rock, and Parker? And Darian, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. I'll take the last one first. You know, I think we're all part of an economic region, and we're all part of a community ecosystem, and we're all in this together. We can't say, well, these people over here matter, but these don't. And I'm actually running because I feel sort of like the area I'm in, which is one of the largest non-incorporated cities in the United States, doesn't really have much of a voice in our county, even though we're a large area. I feel like other parts of the county are loudly represented. So I think everybody needs a voice. How do you manage it? I think you just make room to listen to everybody who comes to you. And not only that, you go out to them. You know, when you called me and you said, we had this issue, I said, well, I want to see it. I need to see it for myself and see what's going on there. And I'm really glad I did that, because now I know how beautiful your town is. And I am put very much priority on the historic aspect of it. Growing up in Texas, there's very little that's very old. And what is old is like the Alamo, like not, you know, the Vatican, let's say. So, you know, you have this beautiful little town, the oldest bowling alley west of the Mississippi. You know, that's awesome. I mean, I don't know if you want any tourism, but I think we should promote that. I think more folks should know about Louviers, because I think it's a beautiful little community. So balancing it with the needs of business owners, I mean, that's the tricky part. Everybody has to walk away feeling they won something. And, you know, they have some rights that they already carry forward. And so how do you ensure that they, for one thing, follow the existing zoning? I still don't have a good answer to my question of, everything was fine, someone sold the plant, now everything's not fine, but nothing has changed. There's no new permitting. I'm struggling with, how are you making noise at 5 in the morning and that's okay? And that's the area where I want to explore that more, because I feel like maybe there's a disconnect with the rules and the business that need to be enforced by someone. So I hope that's enough for you on that. But I absolutely value the historic character. I think it's really cool, and I didn't know about it until today. So the bowling alley and all, it's beautiful. I knew there was a town there, but I didn't know it was so historic. So
Thank you, Darian. Lisa, would you like to respond?
Sure. I like Darian, had not had the pleasure of a tour, right? I had driven through, but if you don't have a tour, you don't know what you're looking at. And so it was incredibly beautiful to see. And I'll start at the top, right? What steps are you willing to take to prevent industrial zoning from changing the character of our historic community? The conversation that we were having with the Brandon representative was really tied to um, how do we find a happy medium, right? How do we work together to really figure out what is really appropriate and what's not, right? And how do we figure out how do we leave the character and the culture of the community while still allowing for progress to occur and bringing along the residents in a way that the residents want to go as opposed to a fight to the finish. And when we were talking about that, one of the things so I have a habit of asking lots of questions. And I could sense the agitation that was welling up because I kept asking questions. And I said, look, this isn't me trying to put you in a situation where you're feeling like we are telling you that you're a bad person. It really is about what is it that you're willing to negotiate? What is it that you're willing to talk about that says, yes, we want to do X, but it needs to look like Y? And are you willing to figure out how do we do it in a way that preserves not just the character of the county or the actual area, but also ensures that the health and wellness of the residents aren't impacted any more than where we currently stand. How would I ensure the needs of the local residents are balanced with the needs of business owners? One of the keys, business owners need residents to purchase from them. And one of the questions that we asked while we were there was how many people are actually employed that live in that area, that specific area. And, how, in my opinion, it's like how much business really is happening right there in that area versus, sort of bringing people to it. I would love to see an area of Douglas County that looks and feels like Louviers, to have sort of those eccentric businesses, right? To be a town, and I don't know how you guys feel about having folks come there for touristing, but it is historic and it's just fascinating. But I would love to have meetings where we talk about it as opposed to making assumptions about what's good. I don't believe in paternalism. I believe in having a discussion, right? I don't believe that I'm a decider. I believe that I'm a representative, and that my job is to understand the needs of the folks that I am representing and to be able to act on their behalf. And that includes both businesses and residents. And my hope is that when you have an opportunity to bring them both together, they can have a real conversation, and that conversation is not at all adversarial, but it is really a dialogue. And that gets me to the very last one, which is, representing all of the constituents. I represent District 2. As a county commissioner, I would be representing District 2, which is the most rural parts of the county. And I was asked during one of a tailgate event that I was attending, how could I, with the Parker address, represent the rural parts of the county? And I said, well, I have a Parker address, but I live in unincorporated Parker, and I know what it's like to feel neglected and ignored and not really paid attention to. And I am here, right? I am meeting with you, and not just because of the election. I am meeting with you because I am interested. I'm a lifelong learner. I am interested in learning more about the county that I live in, and I want to be able to help it. And so from my perspective, given my history and my experience, I've worked with teams that were geographically dispersed throughout a state, throughout multiple states, and internationally. So I know how to bring people together, and I also know literally how to show up where they are. So from my perspective, the way that you manage the interests of all the constituents is that you spend time talking to them.
Thank you so much, both
I would
of
just
you.
add where they are.
Where they are, absolutely.
You have to go to them.
We have two more topics we would love for you to address. Water is a big issue at Louviers. We have our own water district that is currently in peril. Is it possible to meet the water needs of current residents? And how will you balance that with the needs of future residents? What is the proper balance between industry and nature in Douglas County? How do we properly balance a commitment to public health and the environment with the desire to grow as a county? Would you consider a sustainable growth model, and what would that look like to you in Douglas County? And Lisa, I think we'll start with you this time.
Wow. So I grew up in Colorado, so I know that Colorado generally has a water problem. And the further away from water sources you get, the greater the water problem exists. And Douglas County is one of those counties that is far enough away from a water source that we know that we've got a real problem. The core issue that we have, though, is that we've not paid attention to it as much as we should. We used to have a person that worked in the office, in the county commissioner's office, that focused on water. When we, I've attended the land use meetings and some of the planning meetings, and we tend to look at things in silos, and I get that because the owners are responsible for the land that they own and not land that isn't part of their ownership. But I think that we owe it to our county residents as a whole to ensure that we're looking at resources like water, these critical resources, that we're looking at it holistically, and that we're doing that calculus. Every time we bring forward a new adder, right, a new development, a new plot, that we are doing the calculation to ensure that by adding this, we still have enough water to support the residents that are there and the residents that ultimately would be coming. But that it's not just for the moment, that it's into perpetuity. And I think that that's where we fall a little shy. So is it possible to meet the water needs of current residents, and how do we balance that with the future residents? I think that we have to have a policy or a process that allows us to understand what water use really is at the moment, right? We need to understand that as we keep going. And so as we add new, we need to understand that new calculus. What is that going to do with the full balance of water use and available in this county? We haven't done that, in my opinion. I haven't seen that done in the same way. I know that there is criteria that is used, but I don't know how real that criteria is, because we're not calculating actual water. We're not calculating water use by the actuals of use. We're making assumptions about generally how much people should, and it's an estimated use. What's the proper balance between industry and nature? That's a really interesting question, because it depends on how you build out industry, right? If you can figure out ways to create sort of a sustainable model around how you define and build new industry, you can do that in the context of how nature actually works, and use sort of the model of nature and the resources that are associated with what is needed for that particular industry. You can build a model that allows you to use it in the same way that you would anticipate nature naturally progressing. But that is expensive, right? And that takes time. That's like asking for home use to be really that top tier of the water table, and forcing industry, when they need to use water that doesn't need to be potable, that they could actually go down to the core. They could go down way further into the water table to pull out water. That starts to use sort of resources where they're best useful. How do we properly balance a commitment to public health and environment with the desire to grow in the county? I think that all of this is tied to making sure that we understand the implications of what growth is doing to the county, right? In much the same way that we are seeing the wildlife corridors, all of those corridors that they travel generally being impacted, and they're being moved closer and closer to homes. We need to think about that and look at that differently, and really ensure that as we're building, we're thinking about that, again, sustainable balance between how we're building our open space to ensure that there's enough open space for the wildlife that we have here in the county that we really want to maintain. And would I consider a sustainable growth model, and what would that look like? I my platform is about a sustainable growth model. And what that really looks like to me is having the experts at the table that understand the modeling that's required, and being able to constantly do the math on that model. So as you're growing, that you're not doing it sort of in these silos, but that you're doing your model that is countywide. So you've got numbers that you're pulling from all the different areas in the county, so that you understand how resources are going to be used. You understand what the implication are of decisions that you make around one plot or one land use versus another land use, what that impact is going to be on wildlife, for example, or what that impact might be on even open space. But it's looking at all of the variables associated with the county and what it means to run the county effectively. So, I think if you asked me that with a pen and paper and we had to actually do sort of the math, we could have a really interesting conversation about it. But really trying to describe it, the only thing that I can share with you is that you have to look at all of the variables and the resources that would be used in that model to ensure that as you're building, you're looking at each of those constantly and not just in the moment, not looking at it from a silo perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Darian, would you like to respond?
Sure. Is it possible to meet the water needs of current residents, and how will you balance that with the needs of future residents? Well, currently, Highlands Ranch gets 90% of its water from renewable water sources. So snow melt, rain, and so on. So 10% comes from groundwater, which is not renewable. It's millions of years old, way underground. I think a lot of people in Highlands Ranch don't know that. So I think we need a PR campaign about water in Douglas County. I moved here from Austin. In Austin, Texas had a big drought in the 1950s, and they actually are better at water conservation than Colorado, which is surprising. But they learned their lessons from this terrible drought. And so living in Austin for 17 years, there were messages everywhere about conserving water. There was xeriscaping, and xeriscaping would have signs to say, this is xeriscaping. And we would get things with our water bill that would say, low water use and that sort of thing. So it was just in your mind to not waste water. And I moved here where it's much drier and we have this Kentucky bluegrass everywhere. And I was kind of surprised. The culture seemed to be that water was not an issue. So what I've learned in meeting with a number of water experts since I've been running, since June of 2019, is that most of our water use that's really problematic is outdoor water use. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised by some of the really great work they're doing in Castle Rock. And I say pleasantly surprised because compared to Highlands Ranch, it's actually more noticeable. The houses there have signs that say, this yard is xeriscaped, just like I was talking about. And again, just calling your attention to that. But if we could stop with the watering outside or cut it way back, and I'm a gardener, I love my flowers, but I plant drought tolerant flowers and native plants. So there are a lot of things you can do, a lot of education you can do to save a lot of water. And so we need to be doing more of that than we're doing right now. And a lot of it is just cultural, like I said, just this topics of conversation. We need to be doing better and talking about it. So that's one way. And there are many other ways to save water and to preserve water, but they're all more expensive than just using less on your landscaping. So we need to be encouraging and giving incentives for folks to use less water on their landscaping. The proper balance between industry and nature, that's not a really objective question. So it's a little hard to answer, but like I said, people live here because they like the wildlife. And so if you're hurting the wildlife and making them go elsewhere, then you're out of balance. So I'm pretty pleased with the amount of open space we have in Highlands Ranch and the focus on trails and open space we have here. It seems like a pretty great balance in my mind. And so any more dense development than that, I think you would lose a lot of that character that is the reason we like to live here so much. So how do we properly balance a commitment to public health and the environment with the desire to grow as a county? I think, again, whatever the ratios are in the areas that are working, that seem to have enough open space, you just maintain those ratios going forward. But in terms of public health, staying in Tri-County Health is my recommendation. That's an important step for public health here, because building our own health department is going to cost a lot more money and probably give us pretty significantly worse outcomes, because we won't be able to attract the same level of experts for a freestanding health department that we are able to when we share resources with Adams and Arapahoe counties. What do I consider a sustainable? Would I consider a sustainable growth model? Yes. What that would look to me is, like Lisa said, having the experts at the table who know about all the aspects of sustainability, not just water, but other aspects as well. And I think we need to bring back some of the community boards. Like, we have a Douglas County Rural Water Authority, but at one point they had some funding and had kind of an official connection to the county, and that's gone away. And I'm not really sure why, except it reflects to me a lack of it being a priority, and I think that's really problematic. And if we're not concerned about our well water, that's going to impact our businesses too, right? Like, so we need to be concerned about it for the neighbors and for the businesses. And we need to be looking. I think there's always ways to look at other countries, other communities. What have they done to conserve water? There are lots of great ideas out there, and there are some water-wise groups that municipal organizations, municipal individuals can be part of, and I don't see a lot of that at our county level, and I'd like to see more of that. Us interacting with other municipalities and other counties and saying, what are you doing to conserve water? What are some good ideas? How can we work together as a region? And we are doing some of that with Arapahoe County with the WISE water, but we could be doing better, and we need to it needs to be something we talk about top of mind. So
that brings us to our last topic. The health of Plum Creek is critical to the water supply for the entire metro area. Some property owners lease their industrial land to third parties that don't respect Douglas County zoning regulations. There are large migrations of elk and other wildlife through the Castle Pines, Sedalia, Louviers, Roxborough corridor, the same corridor as the industrial zone. Lots of large corporations stand to gain from doing business in Douglas County. Sometimes this is a win-win, but often it comes at the expense of the health and the well-being of Douglas County citizens. So our questions are, how will you ensure the industry isn't given a free pass to pollute or behave negligently in the proximity of Plum Creek? How should the county ensure that quick and meaningful action is taken to stop violations of the zoning's regulations? How will you ensure that wildlife isn't harmed by commercial and industrial activities in and around the wildlife corridor? And you will each be given 5 minutes to respond. Darian, you may start.
Okay, I don't know what has happened already, but definitely they need to be dealt with swiftly and seriously when they're doing something like this. I think that the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment is the agency that is able to act in this case and say, you're impacting the health of the residents of, as you said, this whole region, and you've lost your permit or whatever, you need to stop operations until you can mitigate what you're doing. Obviously people need to give maybe a warning or two depending on how severe it is. If it's just noise or something or dust, then just a warning, and then if they don't comply, then something more serious. But yeah, they definitely need swift and meaningful action when they're not being a good neighbor. Especially if they want to continue being a neighbor, they need to act like a good neighbor, and ensuring that wildlife isn't harmed. Again, just anything that's done that is harming wildlife, and from a planning perspective, that's something we need to plan for. I'm very impressed with the work that the I just drew what's the word, Lisa? The organization that buys up land, the Land Conservancy, the Douglas Land Conservancy. I'm very impressed with the work they've done to preserve wildlife corridors, and that's one of their top priorities when they're preserving land is, protecting wildlife corridors. And so working as a partner as a county with with organizations like the Land Conservancy is important as well. And working with, Colorado Parks and Wildlife to ensure that, we're protecting our wildlife is a top priority of mine. It's something that, having always lived in either a city or a suburb or even a small town, we didn't have that much wildlife. Lisa heard me just the other day, look, deer. I still get excited when I see them. It's something we really love about living here, and want to do everything we can to protect that. It's really what makes living in Douglas County special, is the feeling that we can be so close to wildlife and also have the convenience of living, in an area that has a target. So, there's a great balance here, and I don't want to upset that balance and make all the deer go away, and that would be really sad.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to respond?
Sure. With respect to industry getting a free pass, I've worked for Fortune 50 companies most, if not all, of my career, and the companies that I've worked for has made being a good neighbor an important part of their business culture. In fact, the last company that I worked for outside of Colorado was Intel, and because it had a large fab, there were chemical disposal processes that they had to be concerned about, and they also had sort of an energy use issue that they had to be concerned about. And they were first to market, so to speak, in coming up with innovative solutions around how to do this. And I think that industry that wants to operate out of Douglas County, because of the nature of where we are and what we represent, ought to be as conscientious and as willing to be concerned about these kinds of issues as well, and to have innovative solutions and to help us understand what they're going to do to ensure that they aren't adding more problems to the county as opposed to, adding value to the county. And I believe that the way that you do a lot of that is you ensure that there's a certain percentage of the workforce that comes from the surrounding area, right? So if you've got workers that live in the area, they're going to want to take care of the area as well, right? They're going to want to ensure that the pollution that would potentially negatively impact where they live is taken care of very differently, and ensure that they live in a place and work in a place that is concerned and caring about that. How should the county ensure quick and meaningful action is taken to stop such violations? We have inspections from a health perspective. We have inspections of restaurants, but we don't inspect businesses that operate in our county. And while we don't need an army of inspectors, I mean, there are certainly ways that you can do inspections that give businesses sort of processes that they can employ to give us results that help us. It's sort of like energy use, the meters, right? Just I believe it's Sterling Ranch actually has a methodology that they use that I find interesting in terms of water conservation, and that they have sort of two meters. They have an in-house meter that measures how much water you're using internally, and they have a meter that is external that measures how much water you use on the outside, which Darian had pointed out earlier that is probably where the most waste actually occurs. Well, they've been able to really sort of hone in and budget around that. And I asked questions about, well, in that internal use, are you able to track trends? And can we use that data as a measure for being able to understand what things we can do differently as we move forward? I think that that's the same thing in terms of how do we ensure quick and meaningful action. If what gets measured gets done, right? And so to the extent that we are really requiring that companies be much more conscientious of the impact that they are having on our environment, and there are specific measures that we ask them for, I think that will help. That gives us opportunity, A, to do sort of quasi inspections and real inspections, right? So there should be some annualized inspections and then these metrics that we capture along the way. And how do we ensure that wildlife isn't harmed by commercial and industrial activity? I think again that's an area where you have to measure. It's easy to make assumptions about where the wildlife has gone, right? When we don't see it anymore, we make assumptions that they found a new landing place or they found a new congregating place. And it may be that they didn't find a new place at all, but that they, it's a loss of life or they have left the county altogether. We need to measure that and really follow and track that and understand that better. Because if it's important to us, then it should be important enough to put plans and strategies in place to ensure that the right thing happens.
Excellent. We are really grateful for your time this evening, and we are wondering if you would each like to take 5 minutes to give us your final thoughts and summarize your positions before we leave tonight. Darian, would you like to begin?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Thanks so much for inviting me out to your community and showing me around. I've really enjoyed getting to meet everyone and see your beautiful community and get to know about it. It's definitely a priority of mine to protect historic districts in Douglas County, and I will work hard to protect the culture and community that you have there. It's a very special place, and I want to preserve it. Again, I'm running because we need a leader who listens. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me through my website, darian4commish.com. And my concern about your community doesn't end on November 3rd. I'm your neighbor, and you're in my community, and I care about you no matter what happens November 3rd. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to give us some closing statements?
Absolutely. Again, as Darian had mentioned, thank you so much for doing this. It is difficult at best to do outreach in the rural areas easily. And so having an opportunity to have a forum of this nature actually gives us a chance to not only meet with you and share who we are, but also hear more specifically from you what some of your concerns are. So I appreciate the time that you took to put together the questions and to create this forum. And I know that this isn't something that you take very lightly, and it's also not something that I take lightly as well. My decision to run and the why I want to help is primarily because I believe that everybody that lives in Douglas County should feel like they belong in Douglas County, and they should feel like people care. And we owe it to our residents to hear from our residents and business owners that are in the county. My desire to ensure that our rural areas are taken care of is to preserve the culture and context and texture of our county, because that's really where it happens, right? If we don't do this right, all of the other areas that we have in the county will be greatly harmed by it. And so while I'm certainly not trying to send a message that if we don't do something immediately, we're going to, life as we know it will end, I am saying, however, we have to pay attention to it. We have to be intentional about it, which means that we need to be ever so diligent about what is happening around us, what is happening with those that are in the smaller communities as well as those that are in large communities, because we know that as things happen even to the least of these, right, those are where the core of issues really start from, and it just impacts the whole. So if we can't do the right thing for the areas that people say, well, they're not that densely populated, that's not where all the votes come from. It's not about the votes. It really is, and I shouldn't say it's not about the votes in terms of we need your vote, so please don't get me wrong, but it really is about preserving our county and ensuring that we represent all of the people of our county and not just those who are in the more densely populated areas that are easier to get to. we really do owe it to our county to ensure that everybody has a voice. And my hope is that we can build out infrastructure that allows us to get that voice easily so that you don't necessarily have scenarios where people have to travel for hours to have an opportunity to meet, but that we can meet you where you are, whether that is digitally, whether that is over Zoom, whether that is over a telephone call, but that we have the opportunity to hear from you. So I am excited about the opportunity and the possibilities, and I am prayerful that you will cast your vote and support not just me, but also Darian, right, as we move forward, because we believe that we bring something very different and very unique. I come from a large business perspective. Darian comes from a small business perspective. Between the two of us, I think we've got business covered very well. I have lived in rural areas and also in incredibly densely populated areas as well. I grew up in Denver, so I know Colorado and love Colorado, and I moved to Douglas County intentionally because this was an area as a kid that I came and raised chicken my mother's friend's farm and rode horses on that farm. I'd love to be able to give the future generations that same opportunity and more. But we have to be ever so diligent now about making sure that we're doing the right things so that it's available for them in the future. Thank you.
Excellent. We thank both of you for your time. Thank you so much and have a great
Thank you.
evening, everyone. Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.